You're listening to B2B Tech Talk with Ingram Micro, where we share topics that will inspire business growth and help you stay ahead of advances in technology before they become mainstream. This episode is sponsored by Ingram Micro Xvantage, the game-changing platform that will transform your business potential and reshape how customers see you. On today's episode of B2B Tech Talk, we'll be chatting with Carla Johnson, who is a global keynote speaker, a best-selling author, and a recognized marketing and innovation strategist. Her work with Fortune 500 brands served as the foundation for her many books, and her 10th book, Rethink Innovation, busts the myth that innovation is something that requires a specific degree or specific training. In fact, Carla explains why, to be a successful company in today's hyper-competitive, customer-driven world, innovation must be everyone's business. Her goal is to teach 1 million people how to become innovators by 2025. Will you be one of them? Carla, welcome again to B2B Tech Talk for our third episode on innovation.
Thanks, Nina. And I kind of feel like this is our Lord of the Rings trilogy, but for innovation. Thank you for
Yes.
having me back.
Well, this is where we're going to bring everybody home. This is where we're going to take people to a place where by the end of this episode, they're going to be looking at commercials, looking at their children, looking at the trees move, connecting, drawing dots. I can imagine
Watching big.
imagine graph paper will be out, but this will be. I think that folks will walk away with something really special. So thank you so much for sharing this wealth of knowledge with our listeners, with me. I always enjoy listening to you because I'm so inspired.
And I just love talking about innovation with you, Nina, because you see how impactful it can be. And I think not just the outcomes, but how it excites people when they see that they have that ability to be the big thinkers and the idea people in the room when they never really saw themselves that way before.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you're talking our company, Ingram Micro, 44-year-old company, uh, completely pivoted to and are on the journey to become a platform company. It is amazing when we listen to our Chief Digital Officer, Sanjeev Sahu, talk about it, and he talks about it as delight. He always talks about delighting the customer, that is the objective. And we talked about objectives and being crystal clear when you're innovating what your objective is before you sit at that table. Then we went into the wheel of innovation and we covered top three things. And now where do we go? How do we release these people into the world and turn
into
them
the
into,
wild with their
yes,
ideas.
into the wild world of innovation?
Well, and I think that like this step 4 is generate. And this is generally where people start. This is your brainstorm session. This is your strategy session, your whiteboarding, things like this. And so Sanjeev does talk about when it comes to innovation, think big, but act small. This is your opportunity to really realize what that looks like on an everyday basis. Because when we think about innovation, a lot of what's celebrated and what feels sexy are those big, huge home run kind of hits and ideas. But in the reality, what makes any idea work is the tactical small thinking on a consistent basis and looking at how do we need new ideas every single day to make what we do better. And I love to tell this story to kick off the idea generation part, Nina, about Park Mobile. And they're a company that's very focused on innovation. And their CEO, Jeff Perkins, talked about after one of their innovation weeks that they had, there was a woman who had worked in the accounting department. And I know for me, I don't often think of accounting and innovation in the same sentence when we think about those things, but she learned so much from everybody else on the team that she worked with during Innovation Week that she went back and she observed her own world and she saw some patterns and she distilled them into things about inefficiency, things that were reports that had to be done, but were just monotonous and didn't make it fun to come to work on those weeks when she had to run the reports. And so she said, how do I relate how that feels into the work that I do, and how can I also relate what I was inspired by with Innovation Week into my work. And so there was one report that took her 40 manual hours to run every month. So you think a week, a month, 25% of your time was spent on this single report. And so she taught herself a programming language, and now it takes about 12 minutes to run that report. So that's one of those things where it's big thinking. How do we become more efficient as an entire organization? But it's acting small on a daily basis. And so now she essentially has given herself back 3 months of time every single year that can be spent on things that have greater value, that help her have that white space to observe what's going on in her own company and find those problems to solve, see windows of opportunity, look at what's going on in other places, and take those observations, distill them, and relate them into her work and start to generate those ideas. So I think that's something that's really significant that Sanjeev talks about, that's important to keep in mind, is that it may be these big, huge ideas that inspire us, but it's the consistent, tactical, small thinking every single day that gets us there. I think the consistency part with innovation is such a big reminder for us.
Yeah, I agree. And I think as long as you're constantly moving forward and not just getting stuck in the mud and saying, living in the world of it's either not possible or we'll never get there. Because when the task is so monumental, right? When you think it's so big in front of you, the mindset is, I give up, right? It's too big. But if you make those goals incremental and small and attainable, it is
Mhm.
a different outcome completely.
Sure, and it's a little bit of the dynamic that we talked about in the first episode, where people start to say, that's not my job to figure out ways to, grow the company's revenue. That's not my job to cut expenses. I'm not smart enough to know how to do that. But here's a woman in finance who did exactly that because she was willing to be an innovative thinker. And,
Ah,
as we
gosh,
move,
that's great.
right? Right. It's great. And as we move into step 4 with generating ideas, I think one of the things that people get caught up is they look for the one right idea. And when we have these brainstorm sessions, we'll come up with 8 or 10 that feel pretty good. Maybe you have 15 or 20, but we're always looking for the right idea. And when we're always looking for the right answer, we start to filter ourselves. And back to our discussion about diversity, we aren't even as diverse with our own ideas, much less what we're willing to hear, because we're looking for what's right. But research shows that we don't start getting to truly creative ideas until we've gone through the first 200 ideas. And I know the only time I've been in brainstorm sessions where there's 200 ideas is when I take people through this process in a workshop, and they see now how it's possible to fluently come up with 200 ideas. And are all of them great? No, of course not. But in order to get to better ideas, you have to start with more ideas.
Mm.
And that's why using the first 3 steps of the wheel of innovation to fuel yourself when you come into those brainstorms or strategy sessions and have to generate the ideas, you're ready to go. So you can do the first 3 steps up front all the time, every single day, so that when you're in that hot seat to come up with ideas on a deadline, you're in a better position to do that.
So you've got 200 ideas there. Do people typically build on the previous one? Like, because I've seen that where, like, even myself, when I've been in a meeting and I'll see one thing and I was like, oh, if you add this to that, right? Is it building on it or is it
Absolutely. It's
okay?
it's building, as you think about mind mapping it. That's the really fun part, is that there's no limitation to how you get to the next ideas. It's just practice, and that's what builds that fluency. And as you do this more and more, what you will see happen is you watch your kids play in the dirt with their little caterpillar, machine, and then you see them play Jenga, and then your mind goes through this process so quickly, and you have 20 ideas just pop out because you've practiced it, and you understand that whatever the connections are, That's fine, because that's part of connecting the dots, is connecting the dots between ideas, expanding them, combining them, whatever that looks like.
Wow. Well, I can imagine there'll be a lot of kids out there whose parents will be coming home and they'll go, "Wow, you never used to play with me before.
Yeah, exactly.
This
Now
is
you
new
want
and
to
I
do it
think
all
I
the
like
time.
it.
What's up, mom? What's up, dad?
This is fun."
I need an idea, son. Help me out.
Oh, that's fantastic. Okay. Now what? Now let's take those 200 ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of bringing it back full circle, back to our objective statement. So the reason that we start with the objective statement, but then really put it aside and go through observing and distilling and relating those patterns in, is when you start with your objective statement and right now you need ideas, you're really limited. Your mind is focused on that objective statement
Sure.
and you only share ideas that fit in that box. But now we have 200 ideas and we know a lot of them aren't great ideas, or maybe aren't great right now or in this situation, but maybe they have value down the line. So we bring our objective statement back, because what we're wanting to do is to make sure that the ideas that we have are relevant and potentially impactful to the situation that we have. So now we go through, and our objective statement is essentially a filter. As you go through each idea and you say, we need new ideas to do something so that we can have this outcome, do you believe that this idea will help you get to that outcome? And you can rank them, do a green, yellow, red kind of ranking,
Hmm. Hmm.
and grade them. And then ultimately you'll get down to, and then will we be able to execute this idea with these constraints? So what you will see is that instead of just 8 to 10, 15, maybe 20 ideas, you have significantly more ideas. They're richer, they're much different, and you have more ideas that you're more proud to present and move forward to pitch. So what I see in some organizations is they come out of that brainstorm session and they have that one great idea, and their boss or other team members or whoever they need approval from says, no, that will never work, and XYZ, here's why. What else do you have? And they're like, that's all I got. We only had 8 to 10 ideas and only one of them was good. So this gives you a whole portfolio of ideas to work through, to talk through. And then you really start to feel not just competent as an innovator, but you feel very confident in your ability to come up with ideas that have a direct relevance to the business objectives. And back to, think really big, but act small. That's a great example of what it looks like in real life.
How do you keep people um, motivated and not deflated when their idea perhaps may not be part of the strategy or the short list?
Sure. I think one of the things that does defeat people is how feedback is given. And I talk about that when I teach people how to pitch ideas.
Hmm.
And one of the great things about the wheel of innovation is that by the time you've observed, distill, you relate and generate, you've already done the pitch, because the pitch is literally just a story of the journey of your idea. What was the business objective you saw? What did you observe? The patterns, how does that relate to your work? And then how that inspired the idea. And we don't think about what it sounds like when you're giving feedback to somebody, especially somebody who may not be as comfortable with sharing an idea, or not as confident, and can take it a little personally when their idea wasn't one that moved forward. And I like to talk about giving feedback in two forms. And the first is what I like. And I think the fact that anybody has the courage to come forward and raise their hand with an idea is something that needs to be recognized. Because again,
Sure.
if we're looking at how do we build that culture of innovators, let's consciously recognize the behavior of an innovator. And one of those behaviors is bringing ideas forward. And then there's always something good that you can find. So make sure to go through the good things. And then the other statement is what I wish. So what is the idea missing that you wish was there that would make it better? And I think when you share feedback in this format, you invite people to understand how to think in ways that will always improve their ideas and make it better. And so even if their idea wasn't chosen and doesn't move forward, they have a clear understanding of what they have within their own control to make their ideas better, whether it's that specific one or ideas in the future. And I think one of the things that makes people feel bad is when they've heard no, but they don't have any agency to control how to change that outcome in the future.
That is fantastic guidance and good words to use. And you're right, it does take courage, because going full circle to where we started, not everyone is on that level that has that exposure to talking in front of people and presenting and pitching. I want to go to pitching because that what you described to me is also very useful when pitching to a customer too. I mean, it's not just pitching to a group your idea, but you could be pitching to a customer as well and use that innovative mindset, that journey of how you got here and the conversations that were held with the customer, right? I mean, I see those skills as very valuable.
Oh, absolutely. And I think one of the things that can feel frustrating with customers when you're wanting or hoping to move them in a new direction is what I call the gladiator effect. Your idea either gets a thumbs up or a thumbs down, it lives or dies. And a lot of that comes from they see it as a threat to where they're at now. And I think with innovation, one of the things that we don't take into consideration, we generally tend to think of what's at risk by trying something new, but we don't think about what's at risk if we stay the same. And I think one of the things that the Wheel of Innovation really helps people to do is tell this story of how you can try something new. And just the fact that it was inspired by another company, another example, shows that it has been successful. And then again, that key step of relating the patterns into your own world shows how this becomes relevant to the customer in this way. And I think for sales teams, sometimes they default to evidence, to product information, instead of starting with a story. And it's just human nature. Just like you said, as a child, your parents always said, you're always with the stories, Nina. What's with all the stories? But I think if we look at how do we start with the story and then end with evidence, and evidence is the data, evidence is the product information. But unless we can hook them emotionally first with that story, the data and the product information will never really relate to them, to the customers, like we would like it to.
That is beautiful. I actually heard a TED talk on storytelling with data, and even if you've got a spreadsheet, the message was, "Do not recite the spreadsheet. We can
Right.
see the spreadsheet. Tell us a story. Put a
That's
story."
right.
As children, we loved listening to stories. We're still big kids. We go to the movies because we love stories.
Exactly.
So why
Exactly.
should we kind of leave that mindset at home when we come into the office, right? And we think, oh yeah, this we leave the stories behind us. But I think storytelling is becoming more in vogue. And I love how we're incorporating that into the innovative process. So where the brave person has stood up and made their pitch. Now what?
It's understanding what is the story and the vision of the future that we've created with the
Yeah.
pitch. And I know Ingram works in the world of healthcare, and there's another story that I love to share about how creating that vision through a pitch becomes so powerful. So it was the great Ormond Street Hospital for Children, one of the oldest in the UK, and they noticed that in some of their surgery transitions between the surgery room and transporting the patient, particularly cardiac patients, into the ICU, their error rate was significantly higher than they were comfortable with. And sure, they could have looked at all of the data. They could have, really focused on that and asked themselves, how do we continually improve the numbers? But what happened is that one of the surgeons went into the break room after he had already performed 2 surgeries in the morning. And as you can imagine, was mentally and physically exhausted from the stress. And he sat down in a chair. And as he looked up, the TV was right in front of him and a Formula One race was on. And just at that moment, the car pulled into a pit stop. And in 6.8 seconds, that car was completely refueled, regenerated, and off to do its work again. And Dr. Martin Elliott, the surgeon, looked at that and he said, if they can do all of that work in 6.8 seconds with an incredibly sized team, I think we can learn something from the Formula One team about how we do patient transitions. And so they worked with the Formula One team and they looked at all their error rates and they looked at the orchestration of how a team works together. They actually even had a professional dance choreographer come in and work with the team to understand who moves where when to make sure that everything is as perfect as possible. And this used to be a process that Dr. Martin Elliott said it was loud, it was chaotic, nobody was really in charge. And now it was quiet, it was perfectly orchestrated. There was one person in charge, and they dropped their error rate from 30% to 10%. And one of the things he said always keeps this going is that they tell the story that their vision is to have a 0% error rate. He said, we will never get there, but to continually pitch that vision of what we want the future to look like is something that we always have to keep in front of us. And so I think that's something that Sanjeev does so well, is that he's always telling the story of what's the future that we're building toward, so we can have these big ideas and these small actions that keep us going every single day.
So, Carla, that is an incredible story about the hospital, and clearly they had a desired outcome, right? An outcome of getting to 0%. While lofty, it's amazing what they were able to do. How do we go from uh, pitch, execution, metrics? Where do we measure success on this journey to innovation?
You know, Nina, I think it always depends on what's important for the organization, for the department, for the team. You know, if the person who worked in finance at Park Mobile had used the organization's metrics for her little program, it might have looked like a failure, but she was using her own metric for things she could measure for her own efficiency. So I think when it comes to metrics, there's nothing universally across the board. But I always look at what is it that you're ultimately trying to accomplish with this? Because a lot of times we measure a lot of things that don't actually matter because they are things that we can measure. And I think when we go back to that objective statement and look at the part where we ask, so we can, what are we ultimately trying to accomplish? Those are the things that we should start with for our metrics. And then if we need to reverse engineer it back into a department, a team, or a group of teams, then we understand why. But we also have to make sure when we're measuring that success in one area doesn't cause disruption and failure in another one. We have to have that holistic view of what we're trying to accomplish.
Oh, that's great feedback. In terms of this entire process, I know we've given our listeners a ton of information, and I cannot thank you enough. This has been just amazing. Where can they go to? The book, of course, is Rethink Innovation by Carla Johnson, but where else can they go for information?
Yes, and I always say the name is RE colon Think Innovation. Because if you remember, this may have been before your time, Nina, but the memos in organizations, it was to colon, from colon, RE colon. And that was, what's this memo regarding? So I look at that like this is really about regarding the way we think about innovation and also rethinking how we look at it. And so you can find the book wherever you can buy great books online or in stores. And my website is Carla with a C Johnson .co. There's no M. I say it's .co for the great state of Colorado, where I live. But when you go on there, you can read a blog. I've been blogging for over 10 years. I also have a newsletter that comes out every other Tuesday that tells you a story of innovation, shares some new content that I have. And then every time I give people just a 7-minute challenge, because I say, if you can't spend 1 minute a day for a week, then you need to rethink whether or not innovation really is a priority for you.
Absolutely. I cannot thank you enough for being our guest. Would you come back and visit us again?
Absolutely. And I am so delighted to have been able to spend so much time with you, Nina. I love talking about this with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Impactful global engagements, iconic entertainment experiences, and memorable networking opportunities. Be part of it all at Ingram Micro One 2024. You've been listening to Ingram Micro's B2B Tech Talk. Thanks for tuning in. If you like this episode and you want to continue the conversation online, use hashtag B2B Tech Talk.